All right, today we are talking with Mr. Robert Barnes, attorney for Amos Miller, not only in his current case, which is Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Amos Miller, but also in his federal case, the United States versus Amos Miller. Thank you so much, Mr. Barnes, for being here today.
Glad to be here.
All right, so we're going to get straight to it. The audience is a little bit familiar with the case. Question that I had was, at this point in time, is Miller able to sell anything to his private members?
Yes, the injunction was modified so that it only applies to raw milk products. Amos Miller is allowed to sell everything else.
And what is everything else?
Oh, he has everything. So he has beef, he has poultry, he has pork, he has buffalo, he has baked goods. There's other people in the Amish community that are wanting to support him. So there's a rank like there's soap products and other products like that that are also now available. His site is Amos. There's some fake sites out there that claim to be him. His site is AmosMillerOrganicFarm.com. And that's where you can get all of that. And you can see everything that's currently available. He's made some ghee that he's just going to give away because he's allowed to give things away. He's just not allowed to sell any raw milk product.
All right, that brings me to the next question. So a destruction order was issued for Miller's food inventory. Were they successful in forcing him to execute that?
No, we are filing a petition with the court to challenge that. And while that petition is pending, they can't enforce it. And because they ordered destroyed not only food that was evidently safe and desired, and the food in some cases of people that already paid for it, so it was really their food, not Amos Miller's food, but food they knew was safe. Their own testing had come back and shown the food had no problems, questions, issues of any kind, and yet they're ordering it destroyed. The law in Pennsylvania only allows food to be destroyed that is unfit for human consumption, can't be made fit for human consumption, and has no other beneficial or animal use available. And so the order of destruction is a patently unlawful order that we will be challenging across the board.
So he has not had to send anything to mass trash
No,
can, basically.
no.
All right, that's good.
And one problem is that a good amount of it, some of the raw milk products will be spoiled. So that the only use, might be feeding the pigs, but they don't even want to let them do that.
So did the destruction order come from the judge or the PDA?
That only came from the PDA. No judge has approved it yet.
All right. And was it put forth on the grounds of infection or just production without a raw milk permit?
They had the order of PDA itself doesn't reference the food being unfit at any level or unsafe at any level.
Yeah.
It says solely that it was made without a permit.
Okay.
And thus they're calling that mislabeling, which makes no sense at all because first of all, it wasn't even packaged yet. The packaging laws have no application. And secondly, he's always packaged it correctly. He's never claimed to have a PDA permit. So it's the most preposterous interpretation of that part of the law as well.
Yeah. All right, so you cited in one of your previous interviews that Miller's case could shape the future of food freedom in America. As I have relayed that perspective through my articles and through my videos, I've received a few comments citing that this case does not have the weight necessary to set legal precedents beyond Pennsylvania. How would you respond to those comments?
Unfortunately, those people are mistaken because the authority that PDA is trying to establish would apply across the board, in particular because PDA is claiming they have the authority to regulate food in the entire country. Right now, this injunction order applies outside of Pennsylvania. It applies to entities. Some of the defendants are not Pennsylvania farms. It's prohibiting non-Pennsylvania farms from giving food or selling food to people who don't live in Pennsylvania, to where no part of the sale has anything to do with Pennsylvania. So if Pennsylvania, they said so at the hearing, their goal was to replace the FDA as it related to anything that they wanted to regulate and restrict. So those that believe it won't carry weight outside of Pennsylvania, unfortunately, aren't paying attention to what Pennsylvania is trying to claim here.
So that's because, number one, he's serving customers outside of the state, and number two, he is co-oping with farmers outside of the state. So it's a little bit more encompassing.
Exactly.
That makes sense. All right, so in a podcast with Viva Frey, you cited that the PDA was pushing for such extreme judgments against Miller that the judgments would set precedents to regulate food grown on private property for personal consumption. Was I understanding your statement correctly? Could you explain it a little bit further, unpack it?
Yeah, this was actually the sworn testimony of the officials from the PDA itself. I asked them, "Do you believe you have the right to control and decide whether a person purchases food, possesses food, or produces food?" And they
Mhm.
said, "Yes. No food can be purchased, possessed, or produced without their express permission in
Mhm.
advance, or it's, quote, illegal food." Indeed, they want to treat food as illegal as crack cocaine. Apparently, that's how scary Amos Miller's raw milk is. It's more effective than crack, according to the state of Pennsylvania. And that's why I've called the Secretary of Agriculture the Pope of Food, the self-declared Pope of Food. Secretary Redding, until he gives you the blessing, the sacrament, no, you can't even eat it. You can't possess it. You can't purchase it. You can't produce it. This is the scope of power they're trying to claim. It would give them 100% control, complete monopoly over all food in America.
So Sherry Morris, she was on as a witness, and she said, well, if you want to own your own cow and make your own sour cream, we don't care. But if you want to sell it to anyone else, that's when we do. Was she being duplicitous there? Was there something going on behind the scenes?
Yes, she was being duplicitous because she herself and the PDA had come to Amos and or was already rationing food.
Mm.
They were saying, "Here's how you can have this much for your family. You can do this," and literally rationing. And what it is in front of the judge, when the judge expressed skepticism of that, they're like, "Oh no, we would never do that," when they had just done it. So that it's what they're aiming to do is to establish that precedent with this case. The
Mhm.
judge pushed back on some aspects of it, so they didn't go all out. But
Yeah.
their goal is to ultimately go there because they've already done it.
As I was watching and it was coming to a conclusion, it seemed as if the judge did not understand that under permit, Miller could not offer some of the things that he already does.
That's exactly right. I mean, in fact, that we kept explaining this is the most unusual permit in the world because it's a prohibition.
Mhm.
Imagine if you had to get a license to drive to work, and they said so they said you can't go to work until you get your license. So you apply for your license, but the license says you can use this to drive, just not to work. That's
Mhm.
basically what's going on here. The permission is a prohibition. He's
Mhm.
banned from making almost all raw milk products. Can't make
Mhm.
butter, can't make cream, can't make ice cream, can't make colostrum, can't make a whole bunch of things. Yogurt, can't you name it. Can't make smoothies. All the 95% of the raw milk products that people want, he can't
Right.
make. And so
Right.
it's not really a permit, it's a prohibition. And our argument is that's an illegal interpretation of the law and beyond their constitutional authority.
That was a point at which I thought there was going to be a breaking point because he seemed to think all they needed was a permit for hard cheese, liquid milk, etc. Did you have any success behind the scenes budging him with that particular understanding?
He tried to get the state to after he had the public leave. He tried to get the state to fold on that point, to say,
Mhm.
shouldn't I only restrain the food that he can actually get a permit for? And they made clear they wouldn't budge at all. And then he was like,
Mhm.
"Well, couldn't you agree to this or that?" Nope, nope, nope. Until Amos Miller bows and everybody recognizes we run the all the food in the world, there's no other solution.
Mhm.
And I told the judge the only way would be to take away their temporary injunction. That's the only thing that was going to get them to be reasonable in the negotiation table.
Mhm.
But they had no interest in that.
Yeah.
Because it's not just Amos. They wanted to take out Amos for a while. Their goal is to set a precedent that they can use against everyone, everywhere.
Mm. All right, so you mentioned Nuremberg in the context of Amos Miller's case. What did you mean and how did you draw the parallels?
The ultimate principle of informed consent being such a critical aspect to our bodily autonomy that it's a universally recognized legal norm, what in the law is sometimes called a jus cogens norm, a norm that's so universal, even if a country or government doesn't have a specific law on it, you can enforce it. That's what Nuremberg was all about. Nuremberg said, yeah, okay, these were German government officials following the law. German judges were famously prosecuted at Nuremberg, hence the film Judgment at Nuremberg, which is all about those judges. And it says, so how could you criminally prosecute and punish people who are actually following the law? Because there's a higher law, a universal international law, a just Kogan's law that says informed consent. You can't do anything to anyone's body that is not with their informed consent. All of our food laws are informed consent laws. They're all derived to say when I buy a food item, I know what I'm getting and putting in my body. If I'm buying corn, it's actually corn, it's not green beans. If I'm buying the beef, it's beef that I know I like and is safe. We only needed these laws because big corporations were taking over our food supply at the beginning of the 20th century. Before this, we never needed these laws because we bought it from our local farmer. There were no inspection, regulation laws or any of that. We bought it from a farmer we liked and we trusted. And indeed, federal inspection laws from 1913 through 1967 specifically said none of the inspection or regulations apply when you're buying food directly from the producer of that food. And so the principle of Nuremberg is informed consent. All of our food laws should be about that. Pennsylvania, half a dozen times, has overturned the state when the state went past that. They said unless the food was adulterated in such a way that it deceived and deprived the consumer of informed consent, then you have no constitutional right to prohibit that food item, no constitutional right to punish a person for making that food item. And that was our point. And here, all the consumers agreed. They wanted Amos Miller's product. There wasn't a single consumer that said, please don't make this available to me. Every single one said, please, please make it available to me. That's the principle at Nuremberg that we're getting away from, whether it's in the medical context or the food context. This is supposed to be about our informed consent, not about governmental control.
Mm-hmm. So what about, I'm just going to play the antagonist here. What if somebody says, well, if you deregulate meat and dairy, you'd have to deregulate drugs sold privately, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's maybe a bit of a fringe argument, but how would you respond to that?
We're only saying that traditional foods that have traditionally been bought by a person directly from the farm are what's constitutionally protected. And even then, as long as you have a compelling state interest and a law narrowly tailored to it, then you can still have a law regulating it. And Pennsylvania has 200 years of history, going back to 1831, with cases on this. And it said, when is it okay to exercise the police power of the state concerning food? When it's dangerous or it's deceptive. Mm-hmm. That's when. But if it's not dangerous, it's not deceptive, it's something that you've traditionally purchased, then it's something that you should have a right to be able to purchase. And you choose what goes into your body, not the government.
Mm-hmm. All right, so based on what I heard from your Outside the Courtroom Conversation podcast, et cetera, I expected you to argue more from the standpoint of Miller's private membership or the unconstitutional nature of the search warrant. However, in court, your argument was focused more on the message of harm to the public if the injunction was upheld. Why did you choose to argue from that standpoint?
Well, it was where that judge was. That judge had shown no interest in pursuing the constitutional issues. So the judge made clear that he was really only concerned with public impact. Mm-hmm. And in there, and he, to his credit, he did say in the court order that he respected the sincerely held beliefs of all the health benefits of Amos Miller's food, but he felt he was bound by the legislature. We disagree with him about that, but that's where the issue became under traditional equitable jurisdiction, the primary concern of a trial court is supposed to be the impact of the public and substantial harm on other interested parties, particularly in Pennsylvania. He honestly didn't do an analysis on that. And so that sets up part of our appeal, is that he seemed to think that he had to rubber stamp the state. Mm-hmm. And that's really not our interpretation of the law. And that's where we would disagree with it. But we're preserving all the constitutional issues and raising those on appeal as well.
Gotcha. All right, Sherry Morris was the official at the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture who signed the affidavit of probable cause. She really set this whole situation in motion. The probable cause was based on a customer of Miller's in New York who became sick with E. coli. There was no complaint issued by the individual, and the individual did not want to comment on the case. How would the PDA have obtained this report?
That's still in doubt. So the PDA never produced any of the New York's files.
Mm.
They never produced any other state's files, and there was a history of the PDA lying about Amos Miller and food. They had claimed many years ago that an elderly lady had died after consuming Amos Miller's product. We researched it and, in fact, got a sworn statement under penalty of perjury, an investigative article from a former Wall Street Journal reporter. And as well, we got the database evidence that showed that they were lying all along.
Mm.
That it was an elderly woman who had fourth stage cancer who died in the hospital from cancer. Her own caregiver said she never drank any of Amos Miller's raw milk or any other Amos Miller product. And it turned out that the listeria diagnosis was something that had come 6 months before. So it had nothing to do with her hospitalization, and it could have had nothing to do with Amos Miller. So they'd been lying about it for basically 6 years. So we suspected they were doing the same when it came to New York. They came in and sampled all of his food products, sampled his water supply, sampled his environmental sample. We went and did our own samples of everything, and they found no E. coli at all. So they knew that was false. They hid that information from the court. They knew there was no E. coli as of January 6th. Yet 18 days later, they were withholding that information from the judge when demanding an emergency ex parte injunction. And it fits. I mean, basically, anytime a state of Pennsylvania official is testifying under oath in this case, it's 100% out of 100% that they're committing perjury and lying about something. They did the same thing lying on the stand at the hearing.
So the whole basis of this hearing on their end was a case from 2016 and then that most recent case from New York. The case from 2016 was the elderly woman who died of cancer.
Correct.
Wow.
Who we got their database that they've been trying to keep secret. It's a database. Most people don't know this exists. There's a database that whenever you get sick and they consider it a food illness, they're taking your test results and putting it in a database and sharing it with all the other government agencies. I don't remember consenting to that whenever I went to the hospital, but so much for privacy and medical autonomy. But so they went and tested, and they've been doing this for years with Amos Miller's products, and they were hoping they could finally get a cross check over 6 years, and they thought they had one, and then it turned out they didn't. So it's just a classic. They don't even know how to interpret those test results. The best expert who testified at the hearing testified on our side. Their so-called expert, has a 1980s view of raw milk. The judge kind of had a similar view, quite frankly. Clearly he had never had unpasteurized milk in his life, because anyone who's had unpasteurized milk and pasteurized milk will never sit there and say to themselves, "I can't wait to have another glass of pasteurized milk." The hearing was supposed to be about was Amos Miller's products fit for human consumption, because it was so clear that it was so safe, arguably one of the best safety records in the history of America, at least Pennsylvania as a farmer, millions of products produced, tens of thousands of Americans, zero customers have ever filed a complaint, as Pennsylvania's own officials had to admit on the stand. They did so begrudgingly. They tried to say they only knew this part or that part of the file, another part of the file, but ultimately they had to concede that. And that's why instead they had to admit, oh, we're just here because we think he should have to have a permit before he's allowed to give his food to anybody.
So in terms of food safety and, what is a percentage standard as far as disease in just a mainstream dairy? It's there.
Yeah, what's extraordinary here was that, unlike every other major food processor in the state of Pennsylvania, unlike every other major farm in the state of Pennsylvania, Amos Miller's never had any food recalled. Amos Miller's never had anyone complain about his food. And yet he's the one they're going after. I mean, in the 6 weeks that this case has been pending, they have had dozens of food recalls in Pennsylvania. They haven't ordered any of them to stop producing food. They haven't had search warrants on any of them. I mean, here they're trying to apply this sort of microscopic approach to Amos. Is there one person in 10 years that has a complaint? Let's shut them down. Well, the big corporate producers that they protect are having food recalls every other week. So it shows the absurdity of the whole situation.
And the only difference between Amos Miller and those mainstream food producers are they've complied. The mainstream food producers have permits, have everything, etc.
Exactly. And they're willing to not produce all the things that Amos Miller's
Right.
members need. So they're willing to not produce unpasteurized butter and cream and ice cream and colostrum and all the rest that is essential to the health benefits, as multiple people testified. They depend on it. Their kids depend on it. Their loved ones depend on it. And it's the only place they had found a product that actually worked for their medical
Mhm.
necessity. And so I mean, that's what's extraordinary. All the food safety evidence was on Amos Miller's side in that case.
Mhm. I'm going to loop back to that affidavit of probable cause. It was so fragile. The basis for it was so fragile. How is there any accountability within the system that would say, no, that's not grounds, that's not basis?
The members are going to pursue a civil rights claim and will raise the perjury they committed in the affidavit, the unlawful search that was produced from it, because there was other people's products being stored at Amos's farm. There's packages that other people had already bought that was simply being stored there. That means they have a cognizable property and privacy interest under the Constitution that they can enforce. What the other reason they like to pick on Amos is because he's Amish, they don't believe in suing.
Mm.
So they thought they could get away with it for that reason. And what they didn't realize is there's other people whose constitutional interest they were violating.
Mm.
And so it was a joke of an affidavit. An honest judge wouldn't have signed it, but that's a lazy magistrate in Pennsylvania. And you saw what those courts are like. Pennsylvania courts seem to think the Star Chamber is the standard. These secretive proceedings, no broadcasting, no publishing,
Right.
don't take notes or we're throwing you in jail. Like the cops were running around telling people. That's not appropriate. That's not consistent with the requirement of open courts or the First Amendment, but it shows how systemic the problems are in Pennsylvania.
That they did not seat me initially in the media center, but when I was just in the standard rows, we were being watched. We were not permitted to take notes, and some people had begun to take notes. And on break, the sheriffs came up to us and said, "You've got to turn those in. You cannot take those out of the courtroom." I personally wondered, is that normal? Is it just a Pennsylvania thing?
It's patently illegal, is what it is. And the state rule, the Pennsylvania court rule is only no publishing, broadcasting, or recording. It can't apply to taking written notes. There's a constitutional requirement in Pennsylvania that they have open courts. Our court proceedings used to be outdoors for this reason. The idea that they can not only block you from publicizing it, broadcasting it, live streaming it, but that they can go so far as to prohibit you from taking notes of the proceedings is really absurd. And the reason is this. I heard later from prominent people in Pennsylvania politics who told me that's been systemic now for years in Pennsylvania courts, that the reason they do it is they want the institutional media and the court reporter to be the only one to say they have notes so they can control public display. Think about it. People had got to watch that live. A lot of people would have been shocked that all the safety evidence was coming in on behalf of live testimony from real consumers, all in Amos Miller's favor. And to see all those low IQ representing the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and asking yourself, do I want this person dictating my health, dictating my diet? I mean, these people are all dying before the rest of us are. Nobody. And then the way they lie, and they lie about crazy things. They do a search warrant raid on his property, and because the Amish were shocked and dropped things, they say, "Oh, things must be always on the ground." They know that's hogwash. So they know they would have been exposed, and that's what the Pennsylvania courts are hiding. We're also looking at constitutionally challenging that as well.
There was a stack presented by, it was the first witness put up by the PDA. It was a very thick stack of photos. Is that kind of detail permissible in a search warrant the type of search warrant that they obtained?
And locked everybody out. And that meant that nobody could observe what they're doing, what they're moving, what they're locating, how they're testing, how they're sampling, all the rest. They lied about it on the stand, which was amazing. It's like every time a PDA witness got up there, it's like, okay, what's going to be the new line of perjury? What they forgot is the sheriffs had new body cam systems they put in 6 months before that they were wearing with them at that location. We're going to be getting that body cam, and it's going to prove even more perjury. The second part is you have to ask yourself, why didn't they just use a camera? Why
Mm,
didn't they allow observers? And why didn't they use a camera? They went nuts when a media member tried to put a camera and come in there. Said, get out of here. Why was that? It's why do they just have photos rather than video footage if
mhm,
that was their goal?
mm,
It's because they didn't want an honest representation of what was going on. They wanted to lie about Amos Miller like they've done for years. And so that process of doing things was not at all the correct constitutional process, not even consistent with search warrant standards in the state of Pennsylvania.
mhm. All right, so in your closing statements, you were petitioning the judge with the argument that if the injunction was upheld, Miller would have no recourse once the case moved into trial. I didn't understand what this meant. Could you explain it a little bit further?
So the law exists that if you suffer monetary damages, for the most part, you're not allowed to collect those damages from the state governments. So you can bring federal civil rights claims. In some of those cases, the state governments can be required to pay. But as Amos Miller's part of the injunction case, if the judge ultimately rules in Amos's favor, Amos can't get back the economic loss that he's had to suffer this whole time because the state is considered immune from damage claims.
Mm,
And that's the problem. And that's why the courts generally say not to give an injunction in favor of the state unless it's undoubtable that they're going to prevail.
mm,
And the judge never made that determination. He just thought that he had to rubber stamp whatever the state requested based on his interpretation of the permit laws.
mhm. So is Miller prepared to move into trial?
Yes. So people are keeping Amos afloat. There's a give, send, go that's for Amos Miller that's keeping him. Their goal was to bankrupt him so that he wouldn't be able to continue to contest the case. And they knew because he's Amish, he would never sue himself. So they figured he'll be out of money, he'll be out of resources, he'll be out of business. Even if he wins the case, his farm will be gone and done. They'd been internally joking for years in their emails about a couldn't wait to see him in handcuffs, couldn't wait to see his farm forfeited and foreclosed upon. That's who these people are. They're the worst kind of regulatory bureaucrat. Think of the character from like the first Ghostbusters who releases all the ghosts in the name of protecting the environment. It's that kind of personality, except nastier, meaner, and dumber. And so but because people have gone to the Give Son Go to support Amos Miller, I co-founded a legal organization called Free America Law Center. That's primarily right now about Amos Miller. People can support all the legal aspects of the case through that. And then Amos Miller Organic Farm still has a lot of products available that are not dairy products. And between those three, I think we can keep them alive to win this case.
Yeah. What are the next steps and what does that timeline look like?
Well, on Monday, we filed our motion to stay and to modify the injunction to at least remove the part that applied outside of the state of Pennsylvania, because that raises new constitutional issues: supremacy clause, commerce clause, privilege and immunities clause, right to travel clause, all of those federal preemption issues, because the PDA announced that they want to replace the FDA. And that means prohibiting any kind of raw milk product anywhere in the country if it ever touches Pennsylvania in any way, shape, or form, or even if it doesn't, like here. We filed a motion to stay the injunction pending the appeal. Then we are filing a notice of appeal and trying to expedite that appeal. We're also filing a petition to the court to set aside the destruction of the food destruction order. And then we're filing a federal civil rights claim on behalf of many members that their constitutional rights and liberties are being violated. And we want to establish the precedent that people have a fundamental right of bodily autonomy and privacy to decide their own diet. And if they're buying traditional foods like dairy, meat, and poultry directly from the producer of those foods, that they cannot be prohibited to do so because of government inspection, regulation, or permission, unless the government can prove the food is dangerous or deceptive.
Mhm. So will the trial take place under the same judge?
It depends. So right now, the injunction trial is scheduled with this same judge. The petition challenging the food destruction order may be assigned to a different judge, and the appeals will all go before the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania. That's a different court, and then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And because we're raising federal constitutional issues, the Supreme Court of the United States. and the federal civil rights claim will be filed in federal court. So a bunch of different judges will have the opportunity to rule on this case before.
All right, so with that, what's the time window that we're looking at between today and some type of viable conclusion?
I think a final conclusion we're probably 2 to 3 years away from.
Mm-hmm. And then, I'm sorry.
Within the next month or two.
Mm-hmm.
But the long-term decision of all these rights and remedies, given how the legal process works, probably several years away.
Yeah. So there is the potential for it to escalate to the federal level.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. All right. So as a matter of opinion, just to close out with an opinion piece here, would a class action lawsuit initiated by Miller's customers against the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture be a more effective recourse at this point?
What we're going to do is we're going to look at every possible means. So that's going to be one of them. Members filing a federal civil rights claim against the food pope of Pennsylvania, Secretary Redding, and all the other employees who are going to be named individually for the various bad, illegal, unlawful acts, including perjury, that they have engaged in. These are people that have never been sued before in their lives. They're going to be sued. They're going to be sued in their official capacity and their individual capacity. But we're going to seek relief from the federal courts. We're going to seek relief from other state courts. We're going to seek relief from Supreme Courts and appeals courts. And in the same time frame, appeal to the Court of Public Opinion and appeal to the Pennsylvania legislature and to members of Congress. I want to thank Robert Kennedy, who spoke out for Amos Miller. Thank Congressman Thomas Massie, who spoke out for Amos Miller. More people need to be speaking out for Amos Miller in the political arena and in the public arena, because that's the only thing that's going to get them to reconsider this.
All right, just go ahead and repeat it. You've mentioned ways for people to support this case already. Just repeat it. How can people support this case?
There's a Give, Send, Go for Amos Miller that you can directly contribute to that goes directly to benefit Amos Miller and the farm. Or if you want to buy merchandise or support the cause however you want to, Free America Law Center is covering expenses and all the other expenses related to the case other than Amos Miller directly.
All right. Sir, thank you so much for your time today. And I have your permission to post this at the Shepherdess YouTube and podcast.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
If you are not yet familiar with the Amos Miller Amish Farmer Case, please tap the first video on screen, and I'll see you over there.